Welcome to the eSports Insider Podcast in partnership with Mishcon Reya.
ESI podcast, the second episode in partnership with Mishcon Reya. Today we're going to be talking about running tournaments from a tournament operator perspective, and I'm joined by three esteemed guests today. First, I have Max.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm good.
Tell us a bit. What's your job title? What do you do? Where are you from?
I'm Paralegal at Mishcon Reya. I'm part of their eSports group, so I'm the general conduit between anyone that understands the law and anyone that wants to learn about eSports.
Sounds good. And on my right, I have Mason.
Good
Mr.
morning.
Grove. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, I am the Publisher Relations Manager at ESL. My general role is facilitating the conversation between ESL and game publishers and figuring out what kind of competitive ecosystem they would like to build for their games.
Oh, I like that. I like a competitive ecosystem. And across from me, we have Mike. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I am Mike Bembenek. I am the Director of Content at FACEIT. We put on esports events from various scales, from small activations to arena events around the world.
Sounds good. I mean, barring the kind of dating show intro that we just did there, which was good. You all sold yourselves. I date all of you. We'll launch straight in at the kind of grassroots level. So Mike just mentioned you run, I mean, obviously FACEIT, you have your platform online and you have millions playing in kind of small tournaments, games organised. Working with a publisher from that perspective, how does it work at a very grassroots level? Is it a lot easier to work with publishers, or does it pose the same challenges as going upwards?
Depends on the publisher. I'll throw that out there right away. But, you know what? Esports has changed a lot in the last 5 years, especially from a publisher perspective, because obviously we've seen every publisher now realize the importance of having sort of a competitive gaming ecosystem within either their own game built in or through a platform like ESL Play or FACEIT.com. And those publishers now, they have a choice. They can either go all in, finance, bankroll, hire all the staff themselves, a la Overwatch League and how that was operated through Blizzard, and how Riot now runs their events. Obviously when Riot started doing League of Legends, ESL were the producers of those events, and then they decided to take it, all internally. Then obviously there's the other side. So PUBG, Bluehole, company like that, they actually approach it from the opposite side, where most of the resources come from a third party like FACEIT, and they'll pay for certain aspects of the event, and then other aspects are our responsibility. So it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of that fact. And then there's obviously white label, where you come in, you put on an event for a company, but you don't really advertise your involvement.
Yeah, do you see the same from kind of an ESL side? You guys obviously have your kind of UK focused, your smaller Premier Leagues, and then it feeds into this massive global events, ESL One Series, IEMs.
I think Mike's spot on actually with the publisher approach. Obviously, they all have their own IPs and they approach it in their own way, which of course have the right to do. Some I would say easier to work with than others.
Not naming names.
But yeah, the message we always try to drive with the publishers is one of the most important part of the competitive ecosystem is the foundation, the grassroots scene, kind of creating a low barrier to entry for people who like to play that game, and then trying to transfer them into a competitive player who compete in cups regularly, and it's building the foundation of a pyramid which at the very top are these mega events that you see, and trying to build that pathway basically from casual player to a regular competitive player to joining a team to then going to the big mega events.
Yeah, and I guess kind of from a legal perspective, Max, when you look at esports, it must be quite like a fascinating industry from an IP perspective, because when you talk to big sports teams, you talk to big whatever, there's no one that theoretically has the IP of let's go and play football. Me and Mason can go and play football outside. It won't be great quality, but we can go and do it. Theoretically, Riot could go, I'm shutting down League of Legends, and then we can never play it again.
They do it. They do, publishers do that. So
yeah. And that's one of the really amazing things, especially for me from like an IP point of view as well, is what you're essentially doing is the publishers are creating their basic business model is we make and we sell video games, but suddenly these video games, either through a community, driven approach or an audience demand suddenly turned into esports, and now suddenly you've created more than just a video game. So you're creating an international sport that's possibly successful at a global level all of a sudden. And you need to find a way of being able to regulate that in such a way that, or control that in a way that you want to, that in parameters that you define. That's fascinating, because what you're essentially doing is creating sports out of nothing. You know, when was the last time someone created a massive new sport that we started seeing televised on the internet or terrestrial television? It just doesn't happen. But that's what we see with esports all the time. It was only 3 weeks ago I was given a seminar on the Mishcon Sports Law Academy about what are esports, the ultimate IP holders, and how that works. And then the week later, Apex Legends came out. Suddenly everyone's you see all the major esports organisations suddenly looking for, you know, signing teams, signing players. You suddenly see new Twitch personalities come out of nowhere. This is something that it's part of the rapidly evolving nature of esports, and this is where the likes of ESL and FACEIT have a really fantastic opportunity, because not all publishers are going to have the resources and the capacity to hire all of the necessary staff, build the infrastructure needed to run these events at a national level, a global level, do all of the local activations, to have that expertise. What you need are people who are driven in broadcasting, able to deliver on that point of view. It's an events management business like no other. The challenges that you face, you know, it's not something that you can just bring anyone on board with. And again, even from just a international sporting point of view, how do you manage online qualifiers? You don't have online qualifiers in any other sport, but suddenly in esports, how do you manage that? You know, there's things that until you're actually involved with it, you can be a bit naive. And then from the other side of things, you know, if you are a traditional sporting organisation, you want to get involved in esports, approaching the likes of a third-party operator is a much easier way in, rather than going straight to the publishers looking to collab at that level, trying to invest in an esports team. Which game do you pick? These are all questions that there's a lot to deal with on the face of it, but suddenly being able to offer your venue or to be able to do an activation at an existing sporting venue is a more realistic approach for them.
Yeah, I kind of find it very interesting. And the ecosystem, obviously we have your FACEITs, we have your ESLs, you guys exist in the space and you continue to exist in the space and do very well. Do you not find it a little bit crazy that kind of, when I look at these companies, ultimately the risk, I don't think there is a very high risk, but there's a fundamental risk that, say, everyone goes to the Overwatch gameplay, right?
It's insane. The risk for this stuff is just through the roof, and no one realizes it, which is right. It's interesting because, especially, you know, over the last 10 years that I've done this, you know, as kind of a hobby, so on the, you know, doing it just on the weekends, helping out with online tournaments, things like that, and then now working full time in it. The risk went down, but that's only because, you know, joining a company like FACEIT, where, you know, there's VC money behind it. You know, like, we came up with a well-defined plan before I even joined the company, because I was doing bits, you know, with them. So risk for myself was, you know, try to minimize that as much as possible. But for people who are inexperienced, they come into this and they think that anyone can do it better, right? That's a huge, huge issue. You guys probably hear it all the time, right? Like, FACEIT, we could do that, right?
I mean, one-upsmanship in esports 100% continues to be an issue, right? It's just people always want to.
But you see the people who are like the people who've been in this a long time. You know, we all have a respect for each other, and, you know, we talk at, you know, things like eSports Insider events, you know, privately about, you know, what ESL's doing, what, you know, other organisers within the UK ecosystem are doing. Insomnia, you know, with Game and their festival, they do a lot of I Series esports, and I think we're at a case now where it's starting to, like, we're all starting to become protective again, which is good for the industry. Like, we're, you know, trying to stop cowboys from getting into this. You see on Twitter, like, whenever someone internationally comes up, like, I'm going to do an event, like, you know, people research this stuff right away, because it's a very, you know, savvy audience and cynical audience, which is like a blessing and a curse. But, you know, there's a lot of people who just come into this now and they don't really appreciate the risk, and especially from, like, a venue and insurance perspective. You know, venues are expensive, really expensive. London's very fortunate. The UK is very fortunate in the terms that we don't have a lot of really good esports venues necessarily. But the ones that we do, like, they're fairly cost effective, and, you know, producing an event in the UK is actually, you know, I would say less risky than, say, the US.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to touch on if we look at now how the IP works, and if we talk a little bit about sort of from your side on the publisher relations side, how the discussion kind of gets started, and kind of, I guess, like for those that are listening that are completely outside of esports, what do you need to do? How does it go about sort of suddenly going, right, well, we've got a 500k Dota tournament coming to Birmingham. Like, obviously a discussion needs to be had. I assume there's some licensing around Valve that you need to talk about. And yeah, kind of how does that process work, and how do ESL go about, right, this is a title we want to run, etc., etc.
Sure. So the process is different with every publisher. Of course, there are, and it depends on the on which game it is as well, right? So with Valve, they're very kind of open is the best way to explain them. They listen to what we want to do, and if we propose an event, they will seriously consider it every time, which is great news, obviously. And of course, the same with FACEIT. They work with all the tournament organisers, which is great, and I think they spread the CS action very well. Other publishers. Smaller publishers, for example, are very keen to just try and get their game into the space. So that's much easier conversation to have. There's not going to be an issue where we're trying to get a license from them or confirmation that we can use the game, because they're on the reverse side where they want their game out there. A lot of mobile developers are in this kind of mind frame at the moment where they just want their game out there to be played. Obviously, one of the more fastest growing segments of esports is mobile. And then, it depends on the publisher, really. The process is basically we would open a discussion with them about an upcoming title or a new season for an existing title, and we would discuss how that format looks. Is it going to be like weekly broadcasts, which culminates in a final? Would they rather have online qualifiers, which then leads into like a regional final, which builds into an international thing? So it's really hard to give a kind of copy and paste answer for that, because literally every single project is different. Even sometimes between seasons, the product might change with the same publisher, same game, just because at the stage we're in, at the industry at the moment, still relatively early days, but we're still figuring out the best path to work with different games and different publishers, and it's a constantly adapting thing. Like, for example, the major for IEM coming up, the format has changed. This format's never been done, right? Where every team will end up playing a best of 3 before they get eliminated.
You can never, with esports formats, you guys know probably better than me, but you can never somehow please everyone. There's always pitfalls.
So Valve are actually the easiest ones to work with.
Like
they're very open. As Mason was saying, they they take on ideas. They don't always give them a blessing. Like, they're very if you just kind of do it, they don't really care, but if you start asking questions, they'll kind of go like yes or no. The quickest thing that Valve responds to is like developer stuff. Like, if we email them about an event, it'll take like a couple weeks sometimes for them to respond back. If we email them a question about the API, they'll like 30 minutes or less.
Yeah, it's the old, the old rumor of Valve, like you just have your wheelie chair. And
the thing is, for them, is that their most important thing for them is the title and what's going on in that game, right? So when between ESL and what they're doing with the API stuff for the major at the moment versus what we did with FACEIT, all that stuff is built by us. Third parties, and Valve's very supportive of developing that stuff. But on the other side of this is RFPs, so like requests for proposals.
Right.
So like those big events, like Valve Major, the PUBG, the global summit that we're doing at ICC Auditorium in April. Like NHL's really big right now. I'm trying to think some of the RFPs we've been doing.
There's a big demand everywhere.
Of course, and it's not even necessarily like RFPs. It's like a phone call, and they go like, "Oh, we want to do something with you, but we don't know what that is."
Right.
And then you come in with you do a deck, you send it to them, and they go like, "No, we don't really like that."
Wonderful world.
And then you redo the deck and send them a new deck, and you go through that process 3 or 4 times. But ultimately, it's RFPs. So not every company is getting the opportunity to pitch for all these events. Like, let's put that out there, because the barrier of entry, you need to meet that. So Valve, they won't consider you if you've never put on an event with like less than a few thousand people in the audience, for example. They won't touch you if you have no experience with like pyro and the techniques of doing an event that's engaging.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of stuff. RFPs. That's where you get to. Like, you look at Gfinity, what they're doing. They've got Formula One, they've got the E-Premier League. They've went with like this huge sports thing, which obviously is like...
Yeah. So Call of Duty. Yeah,
God. Why do we keep doing this? Formula One is okay, right?
Yeah.
Formula One, I get it, because it's really dangerous. But FIFA, right?
Yeah. I mean, we could do a whole other discussion on that.
And
Right?
FIFA's whole episode in itself, you know, the first conversation
exactly.
that anyone from any sort of Premier League team is like, oh, so do we just sign a FIFA player and we're done with esports? Is that it?
Right, yeah.
And
I was going to say.
and this is exactly it. And so it's also about educating the people about the wider space as well, because they say esports, but you start having this conversation about esports without defining what esports actually is, because for different people it means different things. When you're talking to smaller mobile publishers, for example, esports is how do we build a competitive scene amongst our players and build it into something that they're going to keep on playing, so that they keep spending money on microtransactions and the game grows and we can build it into something that the players really love, which is different from hosting a Valve major for CSGO, you know, where you got it being broadcast on Twitch, where you got thousands of people in your audience live and you're playing for really big money, which again is different from streamers, because suddenly, you know, you take the likes of Dele Alli and, you know, him streaming Fortnite through the FIFA World Cup. It's like that, for me, is a better use of everyone's time in sports. It's like, we take advantage of, you know, they're now Instagram stars. Why not make them Twitch stars, YouTube stars? You know, the chance for you to be playing Fortnite with your favourite Premier League player, it's just another way of building on existing image rights. But, you know, that's another episode in sports. Sports and esports is another episode in itself.
Juju in the NFL. There's an NFL player who's a big Twitch streamer.
Yeah, Juju. I mean, there's a few. MLB, one of Ninja's stack is an MLB player. I mean, we're deviating slightly, but I mean, there's definitely...
so that's like it's much more clever use of the sports brand and the players is to do stuff that's not anything to do with your sport. And I say this as someone who's like, we're pitching 10 HL teams and we're doing activations on a fairly regular basis right now, and we pitch NHL 19 because that they don't know anything about esports.
No, exactly.
So going and saying like, you guys should be doing a Fortnite or Apex Legends tournament because that's where you'll get new fans from, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's actually exactly what. Sorry to cut in there, but that's exactly what one of our clients is doing. You know, they're hosting Fortnite competitions, massive activations at existing sporting venues. So they're doing them at football stadiums all around the country, and that's a way to bring people onto the venue to meet their favourite players of that particular club, to get involved in video games with them. And it's not strictly an esports thing, you know, esports competition. Sure, there's prize money to be had and certain aspects of it might be broadcasted, but we're not talking about, you know, there's a difference between mass participation, player engagement, or traditional audience engagement, building your brand at an international level, because especially for national teams and national clubs, how do you build that international profile? Everyone wants to be like Manchester United, you know, who are massive all over the world. How do you do that? Not strictly speaking esports, but streaming is one way to do it. But bringing on board the likes of ESL, FACEIT, other third-party organisers and operators who actually know how to manage and run these events, whether it be some sort of online format or whether it be an actual physical event, you know, that's a really valuable way to get into esports, I think.
There's an interesting side of this too, is that in the US in particular, actually in Europe now as well, is that a lot of esports organizations are being bought up by traditional sports teams. Mm-hmm. So probably the biggest UK example is Dignitas, founded in the UK, no longer with us, now based in Philadelphia.
If you're listening, Ozzy, you're still part, man. You're still part.
No, it's good. But Dignitas was bought up. They hired a guy, Mike Prindeville, from NBC Universal, who I've actually worked with a lot because of Universal Open, and that guy is very good. Mm-hmm. He's one of these people who gets it from this perspective, where it's, you know, how can we develop not just Dignitas but also like the wider culture of the sporting organization. Now there's in some ways issues with that, because some of these teams actually do have the resources to do their own executions online and so on. So, you know, someone like the Dallas Stars or the Dallas Cowboys, they've got two organizations locally, right? You've got Envy, which is I think more connected to the Dallas Stars, and then Complexity in the Cowboys. You know, they've got state-of-the-art facilities at the Cowboys training complex in Frisco. Yeah, not Frisco. Quite in Dallas.
Frisco's probably this weird little hub for esports, actually. That's quite
exactly. But you're seeing these hubs grow. Like, I mean, London, obviously. I think people don't really give London the respect that it deserves.
No, definitely not.
No.
I mean, our last event, 140 people, which was
No, of course.
compared to a couple of years ago where we struggled to get 80 down, and this time we had a long waiting list. So
No, of course.
I
you're
remember
seeing
your
this-
first event in the Fanatic Bunker. I think
Yeah,
we had
exactly,
some pizza and beer. And there was a little over 30 of us. I
Yeah,
think.
no, exactly. That was those were the days, eh? Those were the days. But I kind of
So here's like the ESI thing, because I'll
Yeah.
throw this to you as something that we should discuss for talking about events and kind of the order. So you get, you do your RFP, and kind of the first big part of an RFP is where you're going to host this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? That's the difficult bit. So you've got to find a venue, and like London, right? So FACEIT, we host London-based events.
Yeah.
That's what we've become known for. And we've got 3 choices, right? 3 indoor arenas. You got the O2, right, which is 35,000 capacity, beautiful, state-of-the-art, best venue in the country.
Yeah.
Right. Liverpool has the Echo Arena, which is fairly new, which could also be considered. You've got the 2 arenas that are around the NEC, which are 15,000 capacity, and then you've got Wembley, which is about 13,000. Everything else is about maybe 3,000 max capacity. So
Yep.
in terms of big arenas, you've got a very small choice in London. So your first port is like, can I actually book it on the weekends that we need? Because usually in the RFP there's dates of when this event needs to happen. So I mean, you just saw with Starladder and their announcement of their major and how they're pushing it into the August
The
player
break.
holidays for
Exactly.
Counter-Strike. They get a month off in August. This has been established for several years now, and like DreamHack, ESL, ourselves, Starladder for the most part, which is quite surprising that they've announced it this way. But Valve signed it off. So
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's a challenge from the kind of esports? Famously, has been. I mean, we're getting better, but scheduling events and dates. It's not surprising sometimes to have an event announced 3 months before, whereas in traditional sports you have a fixture list released at the start of the season. Everyone knows what they're doing. Do you think it's an area that esports still needs to massively improve on? And do you think that's because of relationships with publishers?
impossible.
Impossible.
It's impossible.
Right?
It's okay. So
Too many
there's.
stakeholders?
I will say that there's like organisers talk. Anyone who says, especially in the UK, that organisers don't talk is ridiculous. But we're not usually competing in the same titles or at the same thing at the same time, right? Like it's
Right,
not.
exactly.
The UK Premiership through ESL. Is all the UK community focused grassroots thing, pushing teams up and trying to find the next Smooya or Depth. FACEIT's doing everything more from like our UK stuff is the UK circuit. It's all online. It's not televised. It's just a hub for people to compete in. So that there's not really competition in that sense, right? It's all the international people you need to worry about, like the new guys who just crop up every week.
And they offer a massive prize pool, and then they basically force themselves into the calendar because the players will want to play.
Right, exactly.
in
And
that
the players always say we want an easier calendar, and then companies like ESL and FACEIT will work together to make that happen. And then another organizer goes, "Oh, that date's free now.
Yeah, let's
Right?
take that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
Let's
Exactly.
take that date." So then all of a sudden, so you've got like DreamHack doing 6 events. Like let's look at Counter-Strike because that's what I know best. So you got like DreamHack doing 6 events. You got ESL doing 6 events, right? So right away, that's almost a quarter of the year taken up by one company. Then you've got, we only do 2 events a year, but we also have the qualifier part, right? So that takes up the players' time. So we appreciate that. But so we're asking for, it's about 60 days, I think, for the year. So FACEIT as a company is saying we need your guys' time for about 60 days, and we'll reorganize things. And then the next, like Blast Pro Series, they pop up. Now they're doing 6 events, and they go, but our events are only one day, and it's like, no, but it's still the travel schedule. So like FACEIT and ESL need to do their leagues, so therefore now like we can't do it until a Tuesday because of the travel schedules. It's a mess, right?
I guess that's kind of why the Pro League got condensed, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
schedules
exactly.
get more
I think
mad.
when you're trying to compare it to like traditional sports as well, there's a couple factors. The first one being is obviously stuff like football's been around for like over 100 years, right? They've had over 100 years to build a format and a structure and set the dates. Like it's the same thing every year.
Yeah.
And there's one body who's organising all that, right? When it's esports, there isn't a body to do it. To be like, these are the regular dates that we will do every year, each year. And they will not change unless extreme circumstances, right? Because And I've heard this analogy a few times. The esports industry is a bit like the Wild West. Like there's so many players in the game who are very good at what they do from a tournament organisation perspective, and there's so many excellent tournaments on offer, but there's not one umbrella kind of body who is saying, right, we actually need to calm down.
To take it back to existing sports and the way that it's regulated, there's no international regulatory body for all esports. Because that just would be inconceivable in that one you have so many different publishers that take different approaches to how they want to do things.
Obviously,
I mean, people are trying.
There are like ESF or whatever, which is
very relevant this morning. The chairman of KESPA has just been sentenced 5 years in jail for $400,000 of swindling in Korea. So that's it's one federation that's been long-standing in esports, and it's been shown to be kind of as risque as some of the more traditional sports, which have been dogged with corruption, right? So the federations is again, we could talk for hours about federations.
But the federations in traditional sport are also corrupt. The NFL is a private corporation, right? That is registered as a charity. None of this. These are all businesses. Anyone who thinks that the FIFA governing body is something official, they've got the most money, and they've managed to have a monopoly on the market.
Exactly.
It's interesting because the NFL this week has a competitor now, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a new American football league that's just been launched. Right. No one really knows this. I'm surprised in the UK, but the All American Alliance, I think, or something along those lines.
AAA.
The All American Alliance.
Yeah.
And will they have the same teams playing, or will they try
it works in the off season,
right?
And it just started. The Super Bowl happened. It's just started now, and who knows how successful it will be. But someone's taking the mantle to trying to compete with the NFL. But in the US, there's arena football. That's another brand of football that exists. So this stuff exists. It's just that no one knows about it, right? Lacrosse league.
Yeah, the added complication is when you bring it back to esports, there's always an ultimate IP owner being a publisher, but also those publishers will have different rights and obligations beholden to them as well. Everything from the music they license to use in the video games to distribution agreements they have with different organisations and different territories in the world. So you take, for example, every publisher wants to have their game to be a massive success in China now, where you've got to have that license through an appropriate body through China as well. Everyone's heard Tencent seems to be the only people able to distribute your game in China, but that's going to have certain restrictions on them on what they're able to then do with their games, for example. And that's going to feed back down into all the different bodies using the game for their own purposes. So it just becomes this really complicated mess where ultimately the publisher is going to want to have that final say on something. So what happens when you have a situation where the publisher is saying one thing, but some international regulatory body that's managing some aspect of the esports calendar says another thing? It's ultimately what the publisher says goes, and that is a risk for, if you're not the publisher in this situation, that is something that you always got to be aware of. Something that we make our clients aware of as well when they get involved in esports, whether it be at even from a player level, team level, sponsor level. Just be aware of, realize that there is an IP holder at the very top of all of this, and you are beholden to what they say. Sure, you're going to have everything put together in contracts and whatever it might be, but it's not that's the major difference, and that's something that you've got to appreciate, and that just makes it more complicated for everyone involved, which has its pros and cons. You take Valve's approach where you've got this, they're very open with letting different organisations host these massive events.
It's a free
They're just go for it, but that's also, it's fantastic in one aspect. It's fantastic if you're doing well out of it. It's not fantastic in another aspect. Like you said, you guys, ESL and FACEIT between themselves agree this is calendar that we're going to make so that improves the players' lifestyles, the quality of life, so we can host better events and really push esports to where it wants to be. And then someone else comes in, it's boom, a massive prize pot, come compete in this. It's really difficult.
Yeah, well, it's new organizer comes in, and the way marketing budgets work is that usually they're nationalized, which is why ESL UK is very successful in terms of the Premiership stuff. Those are the budgets you're competing for, right? The global budgets and trying to get those big marketing dollars and so on. That's you're only really going to get them for a big international event, just because of how viewership is so spread out. Get 10% from the UK, 10% from the States, 10% from Canada, right? Mm-hmm. No sponsors are really interested in that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So that's risk, all of a sudden the risk side of it is that's what brings it up.
Everyone thinks they're going to sell it. Truly global. Look, just come and give us all your money and you'll hit this area, and it's actually no, we're the UK arm. We don't really want to target SEA at the moment.
But that's one of the issues is that esports became a global success before it learned how to be a national success. It's
Right.
the opposite of what happens in most other aspects. Is, it becomes a national success and when you export it to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So when you're when you're pitching for sponsorship, when you're pitching for certain things, then whoever's in charge of that marketing budget goes, that's great, show us your statistics, what are your KPIs, what are we going to be aiming to see, and you throw these massive numbers and then you go, okay, let's take the Chinese audience out of it, and it gets smaller, and it's like, okay, now we're looking at
really honest about numbers.
Yeah, you have to be.
You have to.
and
be,
it's,
like,
this is
There's companies out there that are not, though, at the moment
Right.
in the UK. Like one
Yeah.
company in particular, which terrifies me, honestly. The unnamed company, which I think anyone in the industry can figure out who I'm talking about, blowing money, a beautiful product, but no one's watching it. And then they're getting these huge sponsors in. And those huge sponsors are going to basically wake up in about 6 months and go, wait, like how many people watch this?
How much did we spend?
How much money did we spend?
Yeah, right.
And then that's them out of the business for 5 years or whatever until that marketing person leaves and the next marketing person comes in and goes like, esports, I wonder what this is.
Yeah.
We always
So,
have
well,
to
that's
urge caution. I think I just in general, just because of interest of time, I really wanted to touch on. I mean, it's obviously like it's not contentious, but something very relevant and kind of very recent. I'd say there's two. The first one being Heroes of the Storm, right? This is kind of, for me, when we were going to talk about IP and kind of running a tournament, literally it shows like overnight you can kind of demolish and destroy a scene, right? Just by saying, oh yeah, we're not going to really support the game anymore. Another, like, not really similar, but kind of was Heroes of New Earth is releasing its last update. So that's kind of signalling the end of publisher support. I'm just keen to hear thoughts on kind of the way that Blizzard approached Heroes of the Storm. They kind of went very much, as they do with a lot of their titles, we're going to remove the potential for third parties to get involved. We're going to manage everything. And then through them consuming and taking all the IP, they then could also single-handedly, effectively by removing the scene, right? They made every single player in that esport redundant. Most teams have now said a fond goodbye to their Heroes teams, but...
It's sad.
Yeah, right.
It is sad.
It's sad.
Like, and this, most people, when they see publisher-led things, understand that risk, right? You got to, especially the talent. So, like, when it is really sad that happened, but at the same time, for like anyone working on Heroes of the Storm,
Right.
like
You can
come
see it
on,
coming. Yeah. It's just kind of the abruptness, right? There was no like, oh yeah, we're going to widen the season. Especially at BlizzCon, they kind of said, yeah, we're going to support this. We're going to have HGC again. You're like, okay, okay. Cool.
I think it's simply just a frugal business decision from Blizzard, from Activision, right? Just because they've probably looked at the numbers and saw it decrease over the years. Probably costs a lot. Well, it does cost a lot of money to execute this kind of stuff in house. They're probably shifting those resources and revenue and the money that they put into HOTS into Overwatch League, right? They're going to try and put their eggs into that basket.
So, like, when you guys make a decision from your standpoint, and also kind of when you talk to potential clients that are coming in, like, do you look at title, like, is it purely based on metrics and these titles are growing, and say you were still running a Heroes of the Storm, but you saw the viewership declining. When does the decision come to go, you know what, actually, enough is enough. The investment has been this, but we're not making a return anymore. And how do you deal with that kind of?
Yeah, good question. It's not happened that often where it's been like where we've had an established product and it's just like decreased over time and just died completely. I think that directly correlates with the life cycle of the game, right? There's no game, pop Counter-Strike apparently. No game just lasts forever.
The audiences went up hugely
crazy,
in the last year. Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's mind-blowing.
It's awesome.
And like Siege is doing very well. They're all doing very well.
Yeah,
It's an overall growth, which is great, right?
But this is again one of those things, you talk about the life cycle of the game, and that's completely it. You've got to remember at the top of all of this are people making and selling video games. They're making and selling video games for a reason, and those will have certain life cycles. Counter-Strike, I think, is fantastic in that you've got this established IP. There's generational iterations of it that help it evolve, help it grow for the next generation to become involved and interested in it. But that might only last for so long. I was a massive Medal of Honor fan, and that franchise is now no longer a thing. And you've got to be aware of.
I won't comment on your game choices.
Medal of Honor was cool. The first one was amazing.
Rising Sun was a gem, mate.
But it's just one of those things to be aware of. And then again, it's one of those things that if you're getting involved in esports, you need to have someone on board that understands the ecosystem, so that they can make you aware of certain things that if you're not aware of the industry, you haven't grown up in the industry, you might not pick up on. So, for example, if you're looking at being involved in an event or you're looking at investing in a team, you've got to look at also what they're not involved with together with what they are involved with, because you might realise there's some pretty significant titles missing, or that they've got all their eggs in one basket. You know, if all that team has to offer is a Counter-Strike team, and then they no longer qualify for majors, or they're or the viewership in Counter-Strike falls significantly, or they can't get sponsors in Counter-Strike for whatever reason it might be, or for example, you know, different publishers will have restrictions on what they will allow to be sponsored alongside their games. It's all things like that you need to be aware of. And I don't know, for you guys, it's the same. You know, FACEIT and ESL, you know, they don't just pitch all of their eggs in one basket. You know, they're involved in multiple different games because they realise, you know, you don't know what's going to be next. I mean,
well, we're terrible at being like that in a lot of games. Let's be honest. Like, we're known for Counter-Strike. Like, we're very, very self-aware of the fact that FACEIT is not very well known outside of Counter-Strike.
But equally, you diversify through the platform.
We try to.
There's
like we do, you know, Universal Open, Rocket League, right? Like we're co-partner. We own that IP with NBC.
Yeah.
No one talks about FACEIT's involvement. It's an NBC thing, right?
Yeah, it's 2v2, right? They kind of.
I know it changes. Well, it's not like based around Rocket League. It's like the Universal Open's the IP.
Right,
like the game can change, right? And that's the whole thing is you create brands where it's the game.
As long as you guys are making money from it, it's good. Obviously, the recognition side.
Yeah. I'm trying to do Halo at the moment. Like Halo 3 for me is like how I got into this.
Yeah.
I am like.
I mean, Halo Classic. I think as a game. I mean, again, we're kind of deviating, but. This
not deviating. This is an event, so I'm trying to. The problem I'm having is trying to find a venue. I need a venue that can fit 200 people in. That's got decent hotels. I've got a few. Like there's, you know, London, you know, spaces are getting better. But,
yeah, definitely.
You know, Halo 3 is not a title that anyone's trying to put events on for, really, at the moment, right? Like, even the classic traditional LAN organisers in the UK probably are like, oh, we're going to do a Halo thing. I'm like, no, we need a Halo thing. Halo Infinite's coming out. Let's rebuild that community. Yeah. You know, the UK is not doing tremendously well in other esports, but has been really good at Halo in the past. Yeah. Between the Bucks, Baxter, like Power Gaming. There's some history there. And I want to, like, I think that, like, try to... You speak about the grassroots stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, the community is there. It's just dormant at the moment.
Yeah,
the community is there. We have a few.
Well, that's kind of interesting, because that's like another discussion on. It's almost like a dormant IP, and it's just kind of
we could have
sleeping beast.
Dormant communities and grassroots initiatives. How do you get involved? You know, because the UK has a massive amount of potential. When you look at it as a games market, sixth largest games market in the world. We got loads of fantastic people in the UK behind the scenes in esports doing all the production, putting on these events. Fantastic casters, analysts. And then you get to the pro scenes in the games, and you're like, well, where are all these gamers going? Because every parent in the country is looking at their kids going, all they do is play video games. Why aren't they making loads of money from this? Like, why aren't they at the very top? And, you know, it's one of those things about, well, is it just that we're not supporting the grassroots initiatives here in the UK? But that's a whole other episode.
There's just not enough money in it. That's all it is in the UK. People, I think most UK youth are smart enough to realise how competitive and hard it is to get a job now, and they tend to focus on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think equally it's the same. Like, if you're having a talk and a careers talk with someone, I would never say to them, yeah, you know what, don't go to university. I would always say, get your education and then decide what you want to do. It's not, now in esports, it's not so much, oh, I'm passionate about esports, I know who plays Counter-Strike for Fnatic. It's, right, but have you got a marketing degree? Because I want you to work in marketing. And esports is an industry that works the same way as other... Not the same way, actually. I'm not going to say esports works the same way as anything.
You watch any sort of, like, the, you know, player films and the player stories that come before matches and so on. There's, like, almost always a beat in there, which is... you know, I dropped out of high school.
Right.
Or I struggled through university, you know, and got my...
But, you know, I mean, as a pro player...
Like in Counter-Strike, you got like two examples. Kerrigan, who, you know, went through university while being like one of the best Counter-Strike, or being on one of the best Counter-Strike teams in the world. And then, like, Jake... like Stewie 2K.
Yeah.
He was like 16. He was like, I'm going to join Cloud9. Like, that was his goal. And smashed it. Within like a year, I joined Cloud.
Yeah, like Eternal Envy dropped out. He like ran away from his parents because he had so. I mean, look, I think also this is completely not what we're meant to be talking about, but because we have to wrap up in a second anyway. I mean, I think the kind of point now is if you want to reach that level, it's like with football, right? If you become part of a football academy when you're young, generally those people don't go through. And now football clubs are having to take the conscious decision to build academies where they force people that they sign to their academies to do their GCSEs and to do their A-levels, because it's very much still a tiny percentage of people that will make it to the level where they can make a living from it. Even more so, it's very fragile in esports because of tier 2 and tier 3 scenes. So I think people just need to be educated and
tons of events though. Like there is tons of events happening for UK teams and so on. Be it
exactly.
from Premiership and trying to find leagues and grassroots initiatives. It all exists. It's just trying to find
it's the money,
the
it's
great
funding,
players.
and make it sustainable, right?
That's where
it's a time thing. I think we're moving in the right direction to start building out that grassroots support. But we're growing so fast. I mean, but let's keep the pace, but let's not try and
global first before national, right? And that's the bizarre way. Is in if you like Smooya, right? He went around trundling at some UK lands, mouthing off, being Smooya, and then suddenly we see him on the global stage in a major like top 6 or whatever.
Right?
Had
the whole crowd chanting his name. He has a very chantable name, which is
Smooya. I went to an event in Malta, and there's a crowd of about 100, and they're just all chanting Smooya. It's very, very, very chantable. That's what I'll put. But anyway, that is pretty much all we have time for. I'm sure we could go on for absolutely hours as we we can carry on afterwards. But I'd like to say thank you again to our partners, Mishcon and Reya. That is the second episode of the Esports Insider podcast. We'll be back very soon with some more great content.